To kick us off for the day, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Jude Kelly, who is considering how the arts can contribute to the SDGs. Jude is the artistic director of South Bank Centre, Britain's largest cultural institution, and where we are all sitting here today. Over the course of her amazing career, she has directed more than 100 productions, including Royal Shakespeare Company, the National Theatre, the English National Opera, and the Châtelet in Paris. In her non-existent free time, Jude is also a professor at Kingston and Leeds universities. She also holds several honorary degrees from national and international universities. Please join me in welcoming Jude.
Thank you. I'm going to give a short piece with you. This is a very strange week for London, isn't it? You know, we can't dwell too much, I think, on the different moments that have happened to us, not just this week, but in the last period of time, because it makes us feel so sad and vulnerable and kind of powerless as well. Because if we haven't been directly affected by the tragedy and loss, we feel that we ought to somehow make a connection, make a communication, reach out, but probably most of us don't quite know how to do that appropriately. We just wish we could. And we're sort of standing there and hoping that kind of the equivalent of prayer, whatever that might mean to each of us, would sort of send good waves. And when we were talking earlier about this day, we were discussing how do you get to believe and have confidence that your individual moment of action to make a change happen really is worth something. Because, you know, there's so much to do, there's so much to solve, and sometimes it's tiring and difficult and confusing as to like, well, where do you put your energy? And I know today is very much about each of us as individuals, not thinking just what does the group do, but, you know, where do I sit in that group and what does it mean for me? We've long abandoned the idea that there's sort of work and then your real life happens in the rest of your life. That's not actually how most of us operate. Most of us look to our workspace to totally carry our own values forward. We don't want to be in a disjunctive space with our values. We want to think that at work we can be not only who we are, but in a learning place and in a good space as a citizen. We want those things to combine. And if they don't combine, I think we feel worried and disturbed, and hopefully we leave. I come from a very modest background. My grandmother left school when she was 12 and she had 14 children, 10 of whom survived. And so my dad, who, you know, was a kind of the last in line, he got a scholarship. And so he got good education. And then he went into the war as a navigator. And he came out, you know, the product really of a number of things that had happened at that time. One was an assertion of a society that wanted to fight fascism. Another was a society that recognised that actually to do that, you had to drop an awful lot and cast away and get rid of an awful lot of sort of the inequalities that would stop you being a team as a nation. And then when people came back from the war, they also thought, we can't go back to where we were before. You know, we have to build a new nation with different values. And the same values that made us fight fascism have got to be the values that we instruct ourselves with when we're building a new society. And of course, out of that moment of post-war history came the most extraordinary things, the United Nations, the whole idea of a social education, the social contracts in so many different countries, the idea that, you know, that we had to have formal safety nets for those of us who were marginalised or vulnerable. I mean, so many things came out of it. And in a society now that has driven forward and created arguably a great deal, well, not just arguably, definitely a great deal more sort of fiscal wealth in the world. Nevertheless, we find ourselves thinking, are we still able to move forward with values that make it possible for everyone, not only to get the fruits of the labour we've already done, but how do we move forward into a better future? Can we imagine a better future? Now, as you heard, I'm the artistic director of this extraordinary South Bank Centre, which is 21 acres, committed to the idea of the imagination. And some of you will have very kind of specific ideas of what the arts is. You might think, well, that's orchestras and it's ballet and it's film and it's music, and it's all of those things, of course. But primarily what the arts is one of the most profound ways that humans have always said, this is who I am, this is what I feel. Let me paint it for you on a cave if necessary. Let me play it for you. Let me dance it for you. Let me say it in rhyme. Humans have used art forever as a way of saying there are some things that can only be said through gesture and through sound and through verse, because logic won't get us there. However, like lots of us who end up in a very powerful situation with our own circumstances, what has always profoundly bothered me is that the arts is also potentially a weapon for exclusion. It's the most marvellous thing that belongs to all of us, and then we segregate it all up and go, well, unless you're wearing the right outfit, or you've got the right education, or you can speak the right language, or you know the right things, actually don't come. And that terrible division around the idea of arts being a weapon of separation, when actually it's a common human shared thing, is one of the things that all my life I have been battling with. And I think, we've made great progress in terms of the arts, meaning a great deal more to a great many more people than they did perhaps 50 years ago. But all the time I have in my mind issues to do with what kind of education are we bringing everybody to have? Where does gender equality sit? Not just in the arts, but in the whole idea of a woman's voice, a girl's voice, a woman's story. Does it have equal merit, equal weight? Is it listened to in the same way? And if not, why not? How do we demonstrate that if humans are allowed to let their imagination free and in a constructive, creative way, then actually their health improves exponentially because they can self-realize, they can be like who they really could be. Always you can hear what I'm saying is, how do you reduce inequality? Because inequality is the hardest millstone around anybody's neck, especially when they think, well, this inequality has come about not just sort of immediately circumstantially, but actually because of structural injustice. How do you change structural injustice? And particularly one that we're in the habit of just taking as a given. That constant scouring to see what's a systemic injustice that we're all part of, and how could we do something about that and change it? This is the long, slow progress that humanity is on. And the sustainable goals really are about making sure that we have the stamina to see it through. I mean, when you hear 17 goals and 179 points, you just say, oh God, that's such a lot to do. But bit by bit is how you do it. Now, after the war, this place was created in 18 months. And after the war, of course, there was a sort of huge surge of vitality and optimism. I mean, there was only one way forward. It had to be a better future. And so they took this phrase of the war artists, the propaganda of the imagination. And they said, this is a place where every single person must feel that their imagination should count. If you let imagination belong to the few, then, you can have the rising imagination of Stalin or the rising imagination of Hitler. But if it belongs to everybody, actually imagination tends, as we see this week, to collect around common good. Because actually humans want the best for each other, and they feel better when that is happening. And this issue of service, of leadership, is really something that's very deep inside us, that when we have something good happen to us, in our heart we want to share it. And all of us in this room have a great deal of power. We might not think so individually. We had a row this morning with our kids, or, when we've been told that we've got to downsize our department. I mean, there are all kinds of things that make us feel powerless. But if you think, basically, we're all eating, drinking, and solvent-ish, we're all educated, that gives us so much more power than so many more people. How do we use it? So in my area of work, I think all the time about how do I make sure that one of the great gifts to humanity, which is creativity and the arts, how do I make sure that is going forward for people as something which is for their good and not to make them feel less powerful? How do I solve the inequality that exists in the cultural arena? And I'm doing my best. And you've got other things that you'll solve through attention to these sustainable goals and how you can contribute. But I want to end by just saying something about, do we believe that we can matter? We spend a lot of time talking to children about the fact they have to believe they matter. Unless they believe they matter, then they will self-harm or self-destruct or act out. Mattering counts. And mattering is not just about being witnessed, although that's terribly important, but also it's about seeing that you've contributed something. And that can be a small thing, but it will matter. And we have to have faith that each individual gesture will matter. Because otherwise, if we kind of go, well, they better sort this out, there is no they, is there? It's just us. It's just us. And the quote that I often draw on in a week like this, where I think, okay, I can still do something. I can't solve the whole of the issues that went into the Grenfell Tower. I can't solve all the issues to do with how communities have been ghettoised and self-ghettoised. I can't solve all of these things, but I can do what I can in my arena, and I must. And the quote that I'm going to end on is from Shakespeare, since I am theatre director, and it's from Merchant of Venice, which is a piece full of people who have tremendous poisonous intent and terrible agony around racism and division and how to use their wealth. And Portia, having come back from a trial where Shylock is not just humiliated but destroyed, sees that actually this is not a place she would have wanted to have found herself in. And she comes back home and she sees a candle in her own window as she's walking towards it, and she says to her friend how far that little candle throws his beams. So shines a good deed in a weary world. And I think we have to take that idea that we can shine a beam and it will go much further than you think. And in a weary world, a good deed will count. We can count individually. Thank you.